Hello all, welcome to CACI's Retail Briefing 2023. We have an exciting afternoon ahead of us. First up, there is a CACI session, so that'll be myself, Hannah and Charlotte presenting. By way of introduction, I wear a couple of hats at CACI, so I look after proposition and innovation. But Hannah and Charlotte, who will be doing the bulk of this presentation and have done the bulk of the work, are the team leads for when we go future gazing with owners and occupiers respectively. Following us will be a panel session chaired by Nick and featuring Chris, Julia, Vish and Ed. More fulsome introductions to follow. So we could have stood here today and talked through any number of themes, all of which are impacting retail and property today. We could have done a whole session on COVID. Don't worry, we're not going to. We could have gone on to the rising cost of living, the increasing generational divide, the impact of climate change on business, the latest budget, interest rates, and the implications. But instead, we've decided to focus on the topic that's perhaps the biggest driver of change, and in its own way encapsulates all of the previous points. Data and technology, how you harness it, innovate with it, and implement it. Because make no mistake, the decisions you make now and in the future will have a bigger and long-term impact on business than most of the above. Now, we often talk about data as if it were a liquid. Data flows through a business. We're drowning in data. There's floods of data, torrents even. It's the new oil. We try to contain it in data lakes. And you can see why. Data is this unstoppable, powerful force. And as a result, it can kind of be a bit overwhelming. So what we're going to do today is focus on how you can control it, you can harness it, and you can turn it into something productive that powers your business positively. Hence, the hydroelectric dam. Maybe we should start talking about data power stations. You will also be aware, and the thing that makes this particularly topical, is ChatGPT. And this is the first proper crossover we've seen of that consumer-facing AI. It's the first stepping stone towards the future. So in 2014, this idea of a fourth industrial revolution was raised. I'm going to characterize it for you. It is the rapid acceleration of automation driven by data, harnessing the power of AI and machine learning in everyday life. I suppose the bigger question is, how do you practically connect all of those buzzwords to your day job? And these are the dilemmas that we as a business are also wrestling with. We are, after all, a data and technology company, so it's in our DNA. So what we're going to do today is to connect those buzzwords with the possibilities and the practical of the everyday. Explore how we can use data to better power on-the-ground decisions in retail and property. So our running order for today, you're going to hear from Hannah and Charlotte, and they're going to talk about practical examples of how to innovate and how to make decisions that are driven by data, not vice versa. How we leverage it as a business to power our clients, but also how we prevent analysis paralysis. And most importantly, how you keep that human touch and balance that tension between the creativity and the maths. Now, that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte to start talking about how data powers innovation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alex. So there's a real misconception that as we collect more data, it will in turn create more revenue. But it's simply not true. It won't be the first time that you've heard about data not always working in our favour. It's always been a problem that's existed, even right back to 1492 and the discovery of the Americas. Christopher Columbus had set out to reach Asia, but due to miscalculations and incorrect geography usage, he ended up in America instead. Back to the present world, though, bad data is extremely costly, with IBM estimating that bad data costs the US economy around $3.1 trillion every year. So thinking about us in the room, either as owners or occupiers, I'm sure some of the following will sound familiar. Businesses now have very many disparate and disconnected data points, often conflicting and unstructured. These silos, along with poor quality data, are some of the greatest barriers to innovation and growth. But finding ways to merge it together is what makes it powerful. The ability to blend and connect the data to create one common language. So let's explore how to do just that. The simple answer is through utilising technology to connect, blend, and enhance each of your data sets. I could hit you here with a massive jargon around data lakes, warehouses, SCVs, CDPs, but really it's about creating one view of the world that the whole business can use in confidence, blending them to create something greater than sum of its parts. Gone are the days of us just looking at one data set at a time. The power is in combining them to draw out nuances you once would have missed. Take, for example, analysing some customer data, probably something hopefully we can all relate to in the room. The value is much diminished unless we can overlay attitudinal behaviours, catchments, benchmark behaviour with competitors, utilise social media activity, and ultimately purchase behaviour. A simple profile can turn into something far richer through the power of data and technology converging. And this really is the point of data. At its heart, it's got two fundamental roles. The first is to shine a light on the blind spots, to highlight potentially missed opportunities, and to drive forward innovation from nuances spotted within the data. The second is to guide us on the final 10% of decisions, where typically we misstep. A lot of what we do is still driven by gut decisions, and we still need that human overlay to everything that we do. But data can act as a safety blanket for the final 10% and to guide us on increasing efficiencies. So let's explore both of those in a bit more detail. How do we shine a light on the blind spots? One of the ways we do so is through using transactional spend data, and our brand new and exciting benchmarking product called Brand Dimensions does just that. Brand Dimensions takes 300 brands every single month, analysing over £4 billion of real debit card data to understand how consumers are spending their money by brand, demographic, channel, and small geography. Let's have a look at some of that Brand Dimensions data in action through the lens of Greggs. Greggs have increased their sales by 29% over the last year, comparing February 23 data to February 2022. And that's benchmarked there to Subway at 16%. And you can see from the map on the right-hand side that they have very strong regional sales data, unsurprisingly with a large hotspot in the northeast of the country. But the question really is, how have Greggs achieved this? And the answer is through innovation. They have identified a gap in the market to expand out their opening hours and to open a new 24-hour drive-through location. But what's interesting about this story is how Greggs are using a data-driven approach to rolling out the new proposition. For example, they are considering points of interest data to think about demand drivers such as stadiums, concert venues, and evening entertainment. They're looking at complementary and competitive offer in the proximity to their existing estate. And also through the use of mobile app data, they can identify where there is current footfall passing by their stores during evening times to identify those with a high potential for change. But one of the things, maybe sadly, I love most about this data is being able to track things in such real time. It's being able to look back at the last month and understand what's happened. So when I was making this presentation, I stumbled across a big month-on-month increase in average transaction value across the brands I'm about to show you, which led me to remember that Valentine's Day was last month. So Millie's cookies instantly stand out as a success story from the last month, achieving a substantial 12% increase in year-on-year sales in a market which has otherwise been tough. And with the exception of a slight increase in spend with Ann Summers, and I must pause here and reflect on the fact what a great loss the pioneering Jacqueline Gold is to the industry, spend across jewellery and high-end chocolate is down compared to last Valentine's Day, showing the impact the cost of living crisis has had on people's wallets. So thinking back to my original two roles of data earlier, the second around guiding us on the 10% and improving efficiencies can be seen through the use of data in a marketing world for personalised content. Personalisation is becoming more important as a means of driving loyalty. And this example I'm about to show you from our work with Domino's demonstrates how data and technology can be used to create something truly unique for each customer. It's been achieved through setting up personalised and dynamic text options on email content, including real-time features based on a user's location, the local weather or time, and changing imagery, videos, and text to reflect the demographic of the customer you are communicating with. But amongst all the brilliance that can be achieved with data, we must pause to reflect on the need to be careful with the power that the data wields. I want to end on a message that despite us existing in a world which is becoming more data rich by the second, it's important to take a step back and consider the ethics behind the data we're collecting. You can undo years of trust with clients in just one data mishap, particularly if it impacts your customers' privacy. And of course, data is brilliant at helping us to build up a rich picture of our consumers. But let's just remember that we're people, not data points. It's only when we combine data sets, undertake qualitative research, and invoke our human empathy that we can truly understand our consumers. So, to wrap up on our data section, I want to leave you with a few final points to consider and take forward. Data is only powerful when silos are broken. Data should be shining a light on the blind spots and creating efficiencies. And it doesn't come without its health warnings. Start with the end goal, use data to get to know your customer, and understand what motivates them and why.
Okay, for this next section, I'll be talking about how we harness technology to improve performance, to support growth, and most importantly, connect to consumers. So Charlotte's just talked a lot about data, which in essence is information, and how we can transform that information to knowledge. What I'm going to be talking about is the application of that knowledge and some of the best innovation that we are seeing across the industry. So the best examples we have of technology are not gimmicks, but rather subtle little ways that we've made our lives easier, for example, or more pleasant, or just to do the more mundane things in life more efficiently. So I will talk here about technology as a mean rather than an end, because technology should enable you to get closer to your customer rather than get in between you and your customer. So here are a couple of innovations that dramatically changed our space for the better. None of them are particularly glamorous, but they've completely revolutionised the way that we do things. The postcode was only invented in 1959 here in the UK, and it's now totally embedded in how we do things. And in the data world, it obviously underpins most of the spatial analysis that we do. This strange circle is actually the first ever barcode, and it ended up coming to the UK in 1979. The first ever till was used in 1879, and click and collect was first pioneered by Argos in 2000. Again, all relatively simple ideas, but have become milestones in the modern history of the consumer experience. But I wanted to give you a more recent example. So I want to talk about Gatwick Airport, which around 15 years ago was not in a good place. The main issue was that there were incredibly busy parts of the departure hall, with anxious passengers crowding around the boards, waiting for their gate to be announced. And no one would budge from this area in case they missed that calling and possibly missed their flight altogether. And what this meant for the occupiers was that conversion was really low, engagement suffered because passengers could not relax and enjoy browsing, and this obviously led to unhappy occupiers, unhappy consumers, and passengers tried to avoid flying from Gatwick where they could. But then Gatwick came up with a really simple idea that totally changed the fate of the airport. It was decided that maximising the dwell time at the airport needed to be the priority. So the information boards changed from the kind of please wait sign that we still see at many train stations. And instead, it gave a specific time for when the gate would be available. And what this meant was that passengers now had a set window of time that they could go out and enjoy the shops, the restaurants and the bars around the airport without feeling anxious that they missed their gate. And this was completely transformative. It led to higher conversion, it led to higher performing brands, much happier customers, and a much more pleasant and relaxed atmosphere to be in. And the customers started to choose to fly with Gatwick again. So my point here is that innovation doesn't need to be really far-fetched to have really strong results. And sometimes it's the simplest change that has the biggest impact. And we invite you to ask yourselves here whether there is something small that you could change about your business to boost engagement with your audience. So what we see is that technology tends to develop as we hit significant pressure points. And a recent pressure we all faced was the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns, which I promise I won't dwell on for long. But it was quite remarkable how quickly we adapted. And within 2 weeks, we all had masks, we'd all downloaded Teams, and we could all work from home. Well, most of us could. The non-digital natives of us actually learned how to do tasks like bank and shop and socialise online as well. And we had to do these things because of external pressures. And now that pressure is eased in the UK, at least somewhat, some of those trends have stuck and some of them haven't. So many of us that can still work from home for at least part of the week. And similarly, the growth of contactless payments and online shopping are here to stay for at least the medium term. The reconnection of us with our local communities feels like it's also here for at least the medium term. But what's important is that none of these trends started in 2020. They'd been emerging for a while. It was just the pandemic that nudged them over the tipping point. There are also some things that haven't stuck. So order to table has been abandoned in most pubs and restaurants in favour of actually just going up and ordering. Mask wearing hasn't stuck the way that it has in some countries, and we don't want absolutely everything delivered to our door in 15 minutes. And thank God Zoom quizzes have been replaced by just going back to the pub. But we responded to that temporary pressure really, really well. So we're still facing a lot of pressure, and we've collated across our teams the big questions that you're all asking us at the moment. And here are the challenges you've told us that you're facing, whether you're landlords or occupiers or just consumers yourselves. And we can see that the challenges are roughly the same across the board. For example, staff shortages are impacting everyone, and they are eroding positive consumer experiences, and we're all kind of experiencing that at the moment. We're all under increasing pressure from an ESG perspective, and this pressure comes from our own consciences, from consumers and from government legislation. And the cost of living crisis is impacting everyone, and everything is more expensive from an operational point of view, and consumers' wallets are being squeezed, meaning that there's less money to actually go around to pay for all of this. So to simplify, we have 9 major challenges we must now lean on technology to solve for us if we're going to move forward and if we're going to grow. And underpinning all of these issues is the major goal that we want to achieve, which is to make the customer experience better whilst reducing costs in a more expensive world. Again, none of these pressures are new. The pandemic definitely accelerated a number of these, but actually we've been talking about them for a while. The positive news is that there's already a number of ways that we're tackling these challenges. So to bring this to life, I just wanted to take you through a couple of examples of how we can be more clever with technology to alleviate these pressures. So firstly, this image shows the city centre of my beloved hometown of Cardiff on match day. It's a brilliant day out, but also probably the busiest the city centre ever gets, and how busy it gets causes really major issues. There's queuing, there's stock flying off the shelves, and safety's all kind of massive pressure points that the city experiences on that day. But there is a solution to this issue that can alleviate that match day pressure. So at CACI, we are developing a method of building digital twins. So in a location like Cardiff, you could use movement and spend data across the city centre in an artificial intelligence framework to learn from this and make accurate predictions about what the next match day will look like. And what you can do with that information is optimise where security staff are located, put barriers in the right place to either speed up or slow down footfall. And you can also predict exactly what consumers are going to buy on that day so that you can better stock your shelves and be more efficient. So here's another couple of examples related to staff shortages and safety this time. So firstly, a major issue that we're all facing is retention of staff, and we know that staff in stores regularly face abuse from consumers. So across a couple of major grocery brands, we are seeing trials of age recognition software at the self-service scanners. The camera uses a face recognition to flag whether a consumer needs to be ID'd or not when they're trying to buy age-prohibited items. And what this does is it reduces the friction between the staff and the consumer because this machine makes the ID decision, which improves retention of staff. This second lovely picture shows another innovation in the form of slow lanes, and they're being used to combat loneliness, in particular for elderly or vulnerable customers that want to chat when they're paying for their shopping without the time pressure of an angry or irritated line behind them. And this is something that does a lot of social good within a community. It showcases a real level of care from a brand, and it's also a really effective way of retaining a loyal shopper base. A lot of the examples that we'll show you here today focus around speeding up processes and making that customer experience slicker, but actually sometimes slowing down the shopping experience and increasing that positive touch point are equally important. Another pressure point we're all facing is how to understand the role of a store when online is becoming increasingly the point of purchase. So I've pulled together an example of the issue. Site 1 triggers £5 million of sales that go through the till. It inspires an additional £1 million of spend that goes online and a further £200,000 in click and collect spend. This is Site 2, and you can see that it triggers much less in-store spend than Site 1, but a lot more of those sales are triggered online. So Site 2 has a much bigger online halo, both for online and for click and collect. So if we look at the total amount of money triggered by each store, we can see that Site 2 is actually much more valuable than Site 1. But if we did this exercise just looking at in-store sales, we'd be significantly underestimating the role and importance of Site 2. So the solution is to ensure that we're looking at the influence of a store much more holistically, and so that we're properly valuing that online halo, which is so important. And again, we can do that using machine learning. We can use and connect UK-wide spend data with all the attributes of a store network to understand what the drivers of an online halo are by store, by location, and by asset type. And what you can then do is predict the online halo of a store, but also, if a store doesn't exist yet, you can predict what that would look like. We did this exercise on Zara recently, and we found that the store provided the brand with an extra 43% uplift in spend within a city centre location. Technology doesn't solve everything, though, and it can serve as a barrier rather than an enabler. So just to finish off, I've pulled together a couple of examples of applications that haven't worked particularly well to illustrate this. So the use of AI is accelerating, and someone had the great idea of generating a loop of AI Seinfeld episodes that streamed every 20 minutes. And this was all great, and it was actually quite popular until the algorithm tapped into darker parts of the internet and it started generating transphobic content, and it got taken down for 2 weeks. Another similar example came from German KFC last year. So they had an automated calendar system that ended up sending push notifications linked to an infamous night of violence in Germany in the 1930s, which marked the start of the Holocaust. So a human would not have made this mistake, and the brand had to apologise profusely. And less controversially, some tech just fixes problems we don't have. Amazon Fresh is rolling back its stores across the UK, and I think it's fair to say that the concept hasn't worked brilliantly. One major issue is that the cost of the technology is enormous for the till-less experience. The other issue is that we now have self-checkouts anyway, and the USP of the store doesn't feel like it's tapping into enough of a pressure point for it to be totally necessary. And in my final example of Wheezy, the delivery service that went under last year, the cost of the door-to-door delivery was expensive. It often had a price cap of £10 or above, and it ended up just not being as appealing as walking over to the shop to buy milk or bread. And particularly in this economic climate, it just hasn't resonated that well with consumers. What those examples demonstrate is that technology that gets in the way of that brand customer experience rather than enabling it doesn't really work. And the need for human connection with your consumer is always going to be really important to long-term growth. So when you're evolving your technology strategy, the really key things to consider are, firstly, that technology is only worth the money if it reduces that friction that you feel within your operations. It only works if you ground it in human connection and are really careful with how you use it from an ethics point of view. And you need to be leading it. When technology starts to make decisions on behalf of you, that's when you fall into problems.
So, now that we've spoken through the fundamentals of our DNA in data and technology, we're going to spend some time looking at how we've used both data and tech to drive forward innovation globally, and how we can be global magpies and cherry-pick the best from other markets to bring back to the UK. So, looking globally at consumer confidence data, you can quickly see on there how low down we are in the UK when compared to other countries in Asia Pacific and North America. Breaking down these regions further into countries reveals those with the greatest recent increases in consumer confidence are the likes of China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Mexico. Interestingly, these markets are where we've seen increased interest in from our clients, and we've completed projects in all of these markets in the last 6 months alone, helping clients to quantify opportunity and find growth. Looking forward to 2050, the countries with the greatest predicted GDP growth rates are the likes of Vietnam, Philippines, and Nigeria. And it's fair to say, though, that these markets have not always been easy and smooth sailing to work in. We've had to innovate, we've had to use data and technology to improve our ways of working globally. One such example is that we've covered the whole world into small hexagons, allowing us to break down large administrative geographies. This here is an example from Egypt, where we've combined both NASA data, building height data, and LiDAR data to disaggregate populations down to small geographies. This is enabling location planning decisions, for example, where to sell ice cream at a very granular level. Mobile location data collected through GPS locations of our phones globally allows you to analyse consumer movement behaviour anywhere in the world. In this example here, we were working with a global retailer to quantify the potential opportunity of some sites for a flagship in Hollywood. The map on the left-hand side that you can see on the screen now shows where the density of pings are from all devices seen. But where this data starts to become interesting is when we cut it down by target consumers. In this example, we were looking to target visitors who had been in Hollywood for less than 7 days over the last 12-month period. Essentially, we were looking for one-off tourists. When we overlay the consumer filter to the data, you start to see some real hotspots emerging. The first in the northwest of the map, around, unsurprisingly, Hollywood Boulevard, and the second in the middle of the map, which is outside one of the famous and popular theatres in Hollywood called Pantages Theatre. So I've just illustrated two examples of how data and technology is pushing forward innovation globally. Now let's take a step back and look globally to see what bright ideas have been implemented across the world and how we can bring these back to the UK market. So we're very familiar in the UK with both online and in-store shopping, but one channel which is really booming in popularity in other markets following its inception in China is live streaming. Live streaming is set to be the biggest growth trend in retail over the next 5 years, with big brands in the US, such as Amazon, deeming it mission critical to establish themselves within this trend. To give you an idea of the scale, in 2020, the first 30 minutes of Alibaba's Singles Day campaign generated an impressive 7.5 billion in sales. So it really is big business. As you can see from the graph on the right, it no doubt favours a younger audience, with nearly 50% of those who have purchased via live streaming in the UK under 25 years of age. But closer to home, I've been reflecting on a recent visit to Itsu Live in Westfield, London, where they're successfully merging channels and incorporating live streaming spaces into their physical environment within store. Within the UK market, the current top 3 categories for live streaming are fashion, beauty, and electronics. So it's one to consider, particularly if you're working within those sectors. A second trend we've seen, and we can be magpies from and learn from our European friends on, is how we can do more from an ESG perspective in introducing a culture of repair and a circular economy. Within the UK, we buy more clothes per person than any other country in Europe, not a stat we should be particularly proud of. However, across Europe, shopping centres, community spaces and retailers have been creating spaces for the circular economy to thrive, new skills to be gained and connections to be formed with both brands and the community. For example, repair cafes pictured here in the first image have been springing up across Europe. They were first pioneered in the Netherlands, but they're now very popular across France. ThreadUp and Madewell have collaborated on a circular store, a Brooklyn shop that marks the first times that the brand's consumers can mend and tailor their old clothes. And even the tech giant Apple is starting to consider how important this is to their consumers and also the planet, with them launching a self-service repair shop. They trialled the concept initially in the US, but now they're opening selected stores in the UK, allowing for parts, tools and manuals to be purchased. Bringing this back to the UK market, some of the trends are starting to migrate, with M&S and Dot launching a partnership to encourage hand-me-down clothes with their ingenious labels for multiple children's names. In Brent Cross, we've seen a really innovative example of the charity supermarket, opening with 10 different charity shops all under one roof. And recently, we've been working to help Sue Ryder launch their first upcycle and repair workshop, which opened in Maidstone last year. And if you're still not convinced on how important the trend is, you just need to look at the meteoric rise of the online marketplace Vinted when compared to the fashion giant ASOS. Using the brand dimensions data, you can soon see where consumers are choosing to spend their money. Despite all of these brilliant examples of innovation, I wanted to reflect on the fact that sometimes innovation just happens organically, and it's driven by creativity. I know this is a topic that our panel are going to pick up on shortly, but this here is an example of LX Factory in Lisbon. It's a really cool space that's grown out of independent makers and visionaries creating the space. So whilst we can't recreate these great examples of spaces that embody human connection, what we can do is cherry pick the best concepts to bring back to our spaces in the UK. As channels continue to merge, it's about ensuring that we create more reasons to visit, utilise underused space, and connect to the community with those footfall drivers. Once again, looking back to the UK, Battersea represents a great example of retailers reimagining space, with new concepts being tested under one roof. So, we spent the last 10 minutes or so scooting around the world, being magpies, and choosing the best from international markets. The key takeaway here is to focus on collaboration, We achieve more in partnership and when learning from our global colleagues.
Okay, so this is the final section before we hand back over to Alex. And throughout, we've been trying to emphasise the importance of resonating and connecting with your consumers. So this last section will just try and cement that as the key takeaway. So whilst more data does not create more revenue, what does create more revenue is engaged audiences. And how you engage your audiences is with data. And actually, your customers very much want you to succeed as long as they feel seen by you and what you offer them, whether that is a space or a specific set of products. Because you're always selling more than just those things, in the same way that you're never just shopping for things. We're buying into a lifestyle or an idea or a community, and we'll always gravitate towards positive ones that reinforce our own sense of identity. But doing that job is so much harder than it used to be. We're at a very complicated point in history, and the volatility of consumerism definitely shows us that. At this point of time, we're living through a war in Europe. Cultural divisions are very deep, and we are now seeing real evidence of climate change in this country. And the economic situation is pushing people into desperate circumstances as well. Even this week, we've seen major bank bailouts, which are rocking the global markets, and the 24-hour news cycles and social media make us ever acutely aware of this. And we've seen the impact of this global turbulence in our shopping destinations. An example here we have is how much brand preference has changed at our regional malls. So 10 years ago, according to our Shopper Dimensions database, these were our favourite brands and they really were the staples of our shopping locations. Many of these key players haven't made it this far, and we've lost a lot of our key department stores and also our women's major fashion brands. A big reason why these brands didn't survive is because they didn't adapt quickly enough to the changing consumer. Of the brands that have survived, we can now see how much of their turnover goes through online channels. What they did really well was react their infrastructure to the blending of the channels that was emerging at the time, and they made sure that their websites and their click and collect infrastructure would continue to entice consumers. The brands that are thriving today have all tapped into something that really resonates with consumers as well. So just to pull a couple of examples here, we have Vinted, which Charlotte's already talked about, which has really successfully tapped into that circular economy, and it's just a really easy process to buy and sell clothes. One Rebel has managed to combine fitness with an immersive experience, and it's created its own community, which resonates particularly well with young, affluent urbanites. And the diffusion brands from the H&M group, so Arquette, Other Stories, and the others, have all siloed off so that they can tap into a really specific fashion style. We all want to be unique, and those brands really tap into that well. And so underpinning all of these examples are brands that really do know their audience. And if you do not keep up with your audience, you end up with a big red cross through your business. And we're really at a point now where we must evolve or die. And knowing your audience is not straightforward, and we don't need to look very far to see how different we all are as consumers. Our consumer panel data tells us that there are demographic nuances towards almost everything. When we ask the public whether they'd be willing to spend more on a brand that aligns with their personal views, for example, things like combating climate change, you can see that it's actually younger audiences that very particularly care and apply a lot more self-identification when choosing to buy their products. Here's another example. We'll spend the most we ever have done on health and wellness this year. But if you look on this chart, you can see there's a really clear ACON bias towards rising prosperity being overwhelmingly the biggest market for this trend. So what do you need to know about your consumer? Well, to put it simply, you need to know what they care about. We're at a point where brands and places have personalities and identities, and you need to be making sure that they are good identities, and whatever you stand for, you're communicating this really, really clearly. At CACI, one of our company mantras is to always try to do the right thing, and I think this is something we can all make universal. So the next couple of examples that we have are ways that we can connect with our audience through trying to do the right thing. If you're creating a space, you're embedding yourself within a local community and you have a duty of care for the people that live there. Our communities are really imbalanced, and understanding the specific social needs of where you're going is really important to connect with that community. At CACI, we can tell you exactly what a local community needs by way of services, and this can be used in planning to help with that decision-making process to help your local community thrive. An example here we have is Maidenhead and Redditch, very different places. The spider diagram shows the provision of amenities in both areas, and what's immediately obvious is that Redditch is underserved in terms of open space, in educational facilities, and also in F&B. So if you were developing here, these should be your priorities. And for occupiers, this is where there is a low supply and a high demand, and therefore represents quite a big opportunity. Another example we can use to demonstrate the nuances of different audiences is looking at finance and geography. The cost of living crisis has obviously had a negative impact on almost everyone, but of course, as with everything else, there are major patterns that emerge. So this map here shows a 30-minute drive time from Manchester city centre, and the red of the colour shows the greater hit to disposable income that we have seen as a result of the cost of living crisis. And we can see that Manchester city centre and Rusholme have been particularly hard hit because of their lower affluence population, their higher housing costs, and therefore they're taking the brunt of the squeeze in Manchester. Flixton and Sale, on the other hand, are further away from the city centre, and the demographics in these areas are particularly more affluent, and they also owe less money for things like mortgages. And so as a result, they're much less hard hit. So what we see here is that there are really clear spatial and demographic differences in how resilient each household is going to be, depending on where it is and who lives in them. This is also really crucial information to have right now, to understand your audience, and also just to know how to talk to them. And let's not forget about the younger audiences, who have an entirely different range of factors driving them to spend. These are all influencers on social media, and the final three are micro-influencers, which mean that they have less than 100,000 followers. And so what this means that in all the noise on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they're actually really hard to find, but to their specific tribe, they are really, really influential, and actually their brand collaborations work really well. So being really reactive also includes finding ways to appeal to these people who are fast becoming one of the UK's biggest consumer groups. Equally, though, these influencers aren't going to mean anything to even the majority of millennials. And so knowing exactly who your audience is really, really crucial. So it may seem a little bit daunting to try and connect with your to connect with absolutely everyone, particularly with budgets being squeezed as they are as it's time. And this is why optimizing that process is so important. You won't please everyone that visits your space. It's not possible. But if there is something to take away from today, it's that understanding who it is that you want to come and knowing how to talk to them specifically is key. Everyone wants different things, but if you can go after your tribe successfully, you will be successful. So I gave some bad tech examples earlier on in this presentation, and we thought we'd just finish by showing some examples of brands that have done a good job of connecting with your audience. So, firstly, this is a Nike campaign for Find Your Greatness, which ran in 2012. And what's powerful about this advert is that it's emotive. It showcases children from a range of backgrounds, and there are not Nike products everywhere. The campaign is trying to sell inspiration instead, and it actually connected really, really well with consumers because of that. This is the recent advertising campaign for Lotus Cars, who recently celebrated collecting 1 million followers on TikTok. They hired a brand ambassador who essentially used the platform like his own account. And the brand posted a range of silly videos, trending videos with recent hashtags. And then they were also able to throw in more promotional videos without putting off their audience by being too commercial. And they've done so at really great success, clearly. This next example shows Liverpool One's recent event. They left baskets of flowers around the centre for passers-by to pick up on Blue Monday, to try and spread positivity across the city. And it was a really understated and modest event, and it came across as very authentic, and by all accounts boosted footfall really, really well on the day. This woman is actually parking her bike at Trinity in Leeds. So Landsec used one of the vacant units for additional bike storage to help encourage sustainable travel to and from the city centre, which resonated really well with the young student population who are particularly climate conscious. And then this final image is of Change Please, whose CEO Chamal Ezal actually sat on the panel for this event last year. For those of you who don't know, Change Please are a social enterprise that employ homeless people to make and serve coffee, and eventually move these people onto housing and also other types of employment. And it's another really brilliant example of creating a successful business, but also doing the right thing, really connecting with an audience and very quickly building up a loyal consumer base. So knowing what your customer needs to be done by being reactive to their changing preferences. So always lean into that challenge and grow with them. Doing the right thing will always land well with your audience, so don't be afraid to shout about it. And remember that humans crave connection and community, and this is what you are selling. It's never just a single entity, but rather a set of ideas. So make sure that they resonate with who you want them to resonate with.
Thank you, Hannah. So it's easy as retail and property professionals to hear terms like AI, ML, data lakehouse, CDPs, and assume either, nah, that's not my thing, I don't need to focus on that, IT will sort it out. Or, ooh, that's very complex, I better hand it wholesale over to an external team who really know their acronyms. We would advocate there is a middle ground. You don't need to have a maths doctorate to use the data and tech we've talked about and to use it in your decision making. That level of maths is beyond most of us, myself included. But you do need to retain control in how you use it and what it can and should do. And that's why, as a business, we always try and work in partnership. Or to put it another way, if you're being promised something which is too good to be true, it probably is. At CACI, we try and practice what we preach. So we've invested in innovation. We run our innovation as labs, so micro teams that are focused on specific challenges. We have 4 key pillars, and you're welcome to copy them. We aim, first of all, to empower everyone across the business to identify any points of friction. And we give people the time to find solutions and give them some space to solve it in. When a problem involves skills that sit outside of their sort of skill set, so it might be maths, it might be coding, it might be data engineering, we'll create these virtual multidisciplinary teams to try and solve that specific problem. Stay focused on that point of friction, either internally, if it's an internal business challenge, or more often than not, from our perspective, focused on things that clients have brought to us to try and solve. We don't get distracted by sort of open-end promises and huge, big sort of end goals, but focus on solving the challenge that's in front of you. And that's that point, be open. Create forums to try and collaborate. We often do those with clients. We'll have workshop sessions where we'll be open and workshop through things together and keep iterating and improving. And it's reap rewards. You've seen a lot of them through this presentation, but recent successes include brand dimensions, the cost of living work we've been doing, social value work, and some of the global demand modeling. And coming down the line, we have accelerated our integration with AI and ML. It's embedded in sort of the new developments. So New Acorn is launching later this spring. The digital twins you've heard about is about mirroring physical places in virtual environments so you can test things. And we're rebuilding our shop and mission segmentation. Now, before I wrap things up for today, I'm going to leave you with 4 final key guidelines for you to start implementing. Start with the end goal. Use data to get to know your customer and understand what motivates them and why. Your challenges are not unique. There's friction in every business. So find the friction in your business and address that. Don't be led by the tech. Use the tech needed to suit you. Collaborate. Be open. We learn more, all of us, through sharing rather than being closed. So supplement what you have with what you need to know. And don't believe in black boxes that promise the world. And finally, don't lose that human touch. The goal of data and tech is to put you closer to your customer, not to be an end to the means. We are at the start of a period of unprecedented change. In the next couple of years, we're going to see many of these elements that have been trialed start to get a practical rollout. AI is going to become part of your daily business. You are going to all end up with data lakes that actually work. In time, you might even be speaking in acronyms. Our mission at CACI is to work with you and to make the most of those possibilities. Thank you to Charlotte and Hannah for a great presentation. Thank you all for listening.